Imagine this: a remote land, hidden high in the majestic mountains, where the echoes of ancient wisdom still resonate through the air. For centuries, secrets have remained locked beneath layers of history, awaiting the right moment to be uncovered. What if I told you that within this sacred landscape lies a profound wisdom, a spiritual tradition so powerful that it was once deliberately suppressed, erased from sacred texts, and quietly buried by those who feared its power? Today, we're going on a journey into the heart of Tibetan Buddhism, a path that will challenge everything you thought you knew about spirituality, history, and the very essence of existence itself. We'll travel through time to uncover truths that have been hidden for generations, exploring the rich tapestry of Tibetan culture and the incredible resilience of its people. Tibetan Buddhism is more than just a religion. It's a way of life that has endured countless struggles, from foreign invasions to political upheavals. Yet through it all, its teachings have persevered. The profound practices of mindfulness, compassion, and meditation that have defined Tibetan Buddhism for over 1,000 years are more than just ancient rituals. They are keys to unlocking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Are you ready to peel back the layers and uncover the truth? To explore the deep, untold stories of Tibetan history and the spiritual legacy that continues to shape the world today? Join me as we venture into the heart of Tibet, where every mountain and monastery holds the wisdom of ages, waiting to be discovered. Tibetan Buddhism didn't emerge overnight. Its origins are deeply rooted in a rich tapestry of cultural and spiritual traditions that span centuries. To truly understand its profound impact, we must first look back to the 7th century, when Buddhism began its journey into the remote land of Tibet. The man who played a pivotal role in this transformative era was King Songtsen Gampo, a visionary leader whose influence would forever alter the spiritual landscape of Tibet. Songtsen Gampo wasn't just a ruler, he was a bridge between two worlds. Recognizing the power of Buddhist teachings, he invited Indian monks to Tibet, opening the door to the wisdom of the East. These monks brought with them the sacred scriptures, teachings, and practices that would slowly take root in Tibetan soil. But that was only the beginning. The king's vision didn't stop at simply bringing Buddhist teachings to Tibet. He also commissioned the building of Tibet's first Buddhist temples, creating sacred spaces where the practice of meditation, prayer, and study could flourish. These temples became the heart of a spiritual revolution that would shape the culture, art, and way of life in Tibet for centuries to come. This was more than the introduction of a foreign religion. It was the birth of a new spiritual identity for the Tibetan people. The seeds of Tibetan Buddhism were planted, and over the centuries, they would grow into one of the most transformative spiritual movements in human history. Through times of peace and turmoil, these teachings endured, offering wisdom and solace to those who sought the deeper truths of life. This journey, rooted in both history and spirituality, would lay the foundation for the unique path of Tibetan Buddhism, a path that continues to resonate with millions around the world today. One of the most captivating and revered figures in the history of Tibetan Buddhism is Guru Padmasambhava, often referred to as the second Buddha. But Padmasambhava was not just any teacher. His story is shrouded in mystery and magic, and his impact on Tibetan Buddhism is immeasurable. Known for his mystical powers and profound wisdom, Padmasambhava is said to have arrived in Tibet at a time when the land was steeped in both spiritual potential and spiritual chaos. He didn't just teach the Dharma, he transformed the very spiritual landscape of Tibet. Through his extraordinary powers, Padmasambhava tamed the fierce and sometimes hostile spirits that were believed to inhabit the land, turning them into protectors of the Buddhist teachings. This act of spiritual mastery was not just symbolic, it was a deeply transformative process that laid the foundation for the practice of Tibetan Buddhism as we know it today. Padmasambhava's teachings were instrumental in shaping the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, one of the oldest and most respected traditions within the Tibetan spiritual landscape. His legacy, filled with powerful teachings on meditation, compassion, and inner transformation continues to resonate with millions of people across the globe. But who exactly was Padmasambhava, and why is he so revered? Was he a historical figure, a divine being, or perhaps a blend of both? To truly understand the significance of this incredible master, we need to look beyond the legends and uncover the deep spiritual truths embedded in his life and teachings. As we journey deeper into the history of Tibetan Buddhism, Padmasambhava's story will reveal not just the origins of Tibetan spiritual practice, but the profound lessons that continue to inspire us today. Tibet's journey to embracing Buddhism was neither quick nor easy. Before Buddhism arrived, the land was firmly rooted in its indigenous Bon religion, a spiritual tradition that blended animism, shamanism, and nature worship. For centuries, Bon was not just a religion, it was the heart of Tibetan culture, influencing everything from rituals and festivals to daily life. The practice of Bon was deeply interwoven with the land, the mountains, and the spirits believed to reside in the rocks, rivers, and forests. However, as Buddhism began to spread into Tibet, a fierce battle for the soul of Tibet was waged. At first, the arrival of Buddhist teachings was met with resistance. The Bon practitioners saw this new faith as a threat to their ancient traditions, while many Tibetans were unsure about adopting foreign practices. The teachings of Buddhism, its deep philosophy, meditation practices, and spiritual wisdom, were vastly different from the shamanistic rituals of Bon. It wasn't just a matter of adopting new beliefs. It was a complete shift in worldview, one that required Tibetans to embrace concepts of impermanence, compassion, and enlightenment that were far from the traditions they had known for centuries. Despite these challenges, Buddhism slowly began to take root. It didn't conquer Tibet overnight, but over time, it began to win hearts and minds. The monks and spiritual leaders who brought Buddhism to Tibet didn't just preach, they adapted, blending elements of Tibetan culture with Buddhist philosophy. Through dedication and perseverance, Buddhism started to replace Bon as the foundation of Tibetan spirituality and culture. Yet, the path was far from smooth. Early Tibetan Buddhists faced persecution, skepticism, and constant struggle, not only from the remnants of the Bon tradition, but from external forces that sought to control Tibet. It was a turbulent time, filled with hardship and sacrifice. But through it all, the teachings of Buddhism began to take hold, shaping the very fabric of Tibetan society and becoming the spiritual and philosophical cornerstone that defines Tibet to this day. This transformation wasn't just about replacing one religion with another. It was a profound cultural evolution that would leave a lasting mark on the history of Tibet and the world. Let's take a deeper look at the incredible challenges early Tibetan Buddhists faced and how they overcame them. As Buddhism took root and flourished in Tibet, it didn't just remain confined to the walls of temples. It began to shape the very fabric of Tibetan society. Monasteries like the Jokhang in Lhasa became more than just spiritual centers. They transformed into powerful hubs where politics, philosophy, and culture intersected. The Jokhang, with its stunning architecture and sacred relics, wasn't just a place to meditate. It became a symbol of Tibet's religious and political identity. The monastery's influence stretched far beyond its walls, becoming an essential part of the Tibetan ruling class and a focal point for the entire nation. Then there were the great learning centers like Drepung and Sera monasteries, where the intellectual heart of Tibetan Buddhism beat strongest. These monasteries were not just places of worship, they were centers of education, where scholars and monks spent years studying the profound teachings of the Buddha. Within these sacred halls, debates on philosophy, ethics, and the nature of reality would go on for hours, sometimes even days. These debates were not mere academic exercises. They were a vital part of Tibetan Buddhist practice, as monks and scholars honed their minds through rigorous discussion. But it wasn't just intellectual growth that made these monasteries so influential. They were political powerhouses in their own right. The abbots of these monasteries often held significant sway in the Tibetan government, and the spiritual leaders were deeply intertwined with the political leadership of the country. In a land where the line between religion and politics was often blurred, monasteries became the backbone of Tibetan governance, shaping policies and guiding the decisions of the ruling elite. Imagine a time when monasteries weren't just places of prayer, but the powerhouses of political influence, intellectual debate, and cultural development. These sacred institutions played a pivotal role in not just preserving Tibetan Buddhism, but in shaping the history of Tibet itself. Let's take a deeper look at how these monasteries became the beating heart of Tibetan society and how their influence reached far beyond the realm of religion. Now, let's explore one of the most recognized and revered figures in Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama. The title Dalai Lama translates to Ocean of Wisdom, a title that carries with it centuries of history, spiritual depth, and profound significance. But what does it truly mean to be the Dalai Lama? And how did this title become the symbol of Tibetan spiritual leadership that it is today? The Dalai Lama is not just a figurehead or a religious leader. He is the embodiment of Tibetan Buddhism's teachings, a spiritual guide whose influence stretches far beyond the borders of Tibet. The title itself, given to the highest spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, was first bestowed upon the third Dalai Lama in the 16th century by the Mongol ruler Altan Khan. However, the roots of the Dalai Lama's spiritual leadership stretch back much further, as Tibet's religious leaders and rulers recognized the need for a figure who could unite the spiritual and political aspects of Tibetan life. Over time, the Dalai Lama became more than just the head of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism. He grew into a symbol of Tibet's identity, its spiritual resilience, and its quest for peace and compassion. The Dalai Lama's role was not limited to guiding Tibetans in their spiritual practices. He also played a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of Tibet, serving as both a religious and temporal leader. In this dual capacity, he helped establish policies and frameworks that promoted peace, education, and the preservation of Tibetan culture. But the Dalai Lama's influence doesn't stop within Tibet's borders. As Tibet's spiritual leader, he became a global symbol of peace, compassion, and non-violence. His advocacy for human rights, his calls for Tibetan autonomy, and his unwavering commitment to promoting interfaith dialogue have made him one of the most respected figures in the world today. To understand the Dalai Lama's significance, we need to recognize that this title is not just a role. It's a living symbol of Tibetan history, culture, and spiritual heritage. The Dalai Lama's teachings have transcended time, and his presence continues to inspire millions worldwide. Let's take a closer look at how this title came to be and why it represents so much more than just a position of power. It represents the heart and soul of Tibetan Buddhism and the enduring spirit of the Tibetan people. In the 1950s, Tibet's peaceful way of life and its centuries-old spiritual practices were violently disrupted by the invasion of China. Tibet, a land that had existed in relative isolation for centuries, suddenly found itself thrust into the harsh reality of imperial expansion. The Chinese government, with little regard for Tibetan culture or religion, sought to impose its rule, disregarding the deep spiritual heritage that had shaped the Tibetan people for generations. The invasion was not just a military conquest, it was an assault on the very soul of Tibet. At the heart of this assault was Tibetan Buddhism. The Chinese authorities viewed the religion as a threat to their control and sought to suppress it by destroying monasteries, banning religious practices, and undermining the authority of the Dalai Lama. The once thriving monasteries that had been centers of spiritual and intellectual life were razed to the ground. The sacred texts, revered for centuries, were burned. For the Tibetan people, this was not just an attack on their land. It was an attack on their identity, their culture, and their very way of life. Thousands of Tibetans were forced to flee their homeland, seeking refuge in India and other countries, while many monks, nuns, and laypeople were subjected to persecution, imprisonment, or worse. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, was forced into exile in 1959 as China's grip on Tibet tightened. This marked one of the darkest chapters in Tibetan history. Yet, despite the suffering and loss, Tibetan Buddhism did not fade into oblivion. In exile, Tibetan Buddhists found new strength. Monasteries were rebuilt in India, Nepal, and beyond, and the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism spread to the world. The Dalai Lama, now a symbol of Tibetan resilience, became a global advocate for peace, compassion, and human rights. The invasion didn't extinguish Tibetan Buddhism. It gave rise to something new. It became a movement, not just of survival, but of spreading the wisdom and teachings of Tibet to the world. Tibetan Buddhism became a beacon of hope, showing that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the spirit of Tibet could not be destroyed. Let's dive deeper into how Tibetan Buddhism not only survived, but thrived in the face of adversity, and how its teachings continue to inspire people around the globe today. After the Chinese invasion, many Tibetans, including the Dalai Lama, were forced into exile, finding refuge in India. This marked a devastating loss for Tibet, but paradoxically, it also set the stage for a new beginning. The exile of Tibetan spiritual leaders wasn't the end of Tibetan Buddhism. It became the catalyst for a new chapter, one that would see Tibetan Buddhism spread far beyond the borders of its homeland. From the safety of India, the Tibetan community began to rebuild its monasteries, preserve sacred texts, and teach the profound wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism to a global audience. It was here that the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism found a receptive audience in the West. As the world became more interconnected, many Westerners, searching for meaning and depth beyond materialism, began to seek out Eastern spiritual practices, and Tibetan Buddhism, with its deep meditative practices and profound philosophical teachings, resonated deeply. But what was it about Tibetan Buddhism that captured the imagination of people from such different cultures? Perhaps it was the tradition's emphasis on compassion, mindfulness, and the transformative power of meditation. Tibetan Buddhism isn't just a religion, it's a way of life, a path to personal awakening, and a guide to living with greater empathy and wisdom. Its focus on inner peace, the impermanence of life, and the cultivation of compassion spoke to a growing number of individuals looking for something more than the conventional paths offered by Western society. The Dalai Lama, with his message of universal compassion and non-violence, became a powerful symbol for many around the world. His teachings, focused on human rights, environmentalism, and inner peace, transcended religious boundaries and made Tibetan Buddhism accessible to a broader audience. The accessibility of Tibetan practices, including meditation and mindfulness, made it easier for people from all walks of life to incorporate them into their daily routines. In the decades that followed, Tibetan Buddhism became a global movement. Its teachings, once confined to the high mountains of Tibet, spread to cities and communities across the globe. Tibetan monks and teachers established centers in the West, and Tibetan Buddhist practices were embraced by millions, helping to create a more compassionate and mindful world. Let's explore how Tibetan Buddhism, born from the ashes of hardship, became a global force, touching lives and inspiring millions worldwide. What started as a means of survival in exile blossomed into a spiritual revolution that continues to make an impact to this day. Today, Tibetan Buddhism is no longer confined to the remote mountains of Tibet or the spiritual streets of Dharamsala in India. It has blossomed into a global phenomenon, touching lives from the bustling cities of New York and London to the quiet corners of Africa. In meditation centers and community spaces across the world, the teachings of Tibetan lamas and the practices of mindfulness are being embraced by millions of people. But what is it about Tibetan Buddhism that has captured the hearts and minds of so many? Why does it resonate so deeply with people from every corner of the globe? To understand its widespread appeal, we need to look at what Tibetan Buddhism offers that feels so unique in today's fast-paced, often chaotic world. At its core, Tibetan Buddhism provides a profound sense of inner peace and clarity, something that many people are seeking in the midst of modern life's stress and distractions. Through practices like meditation, mindfulness, and visualization, Tibetan Buddhism teaches individuals how to connect with their deepest selves, quiet the noise of their thoughts, and find a sense of stillness in a world that never seems to slow down. But it's not just about individual peace. Tibetan Buddhism's emphasis on compassion, altruism, and wisdom offers a roadmap for how we can relate to one another and to the world around us. In a time when division and conflict seem to dominate the global stage, the message of universal love and understanding that Tibetan Buddhism conveys is more relevant than ever. The teachings urge us to cultivate compassion, not just for our loved ones, but for all sentient beings, encouraging people to see the interconnectedness of all life. Furthermore, Tibetan Buddhism is flexible and adaptable, allowing its practices to be integrated into any cultural context. It doesn't demand adherence to a single way of life or a strict dogma. Instead, it invites individuals to embark on their own spiritual journey, guided by the timeless wisdom of Tibetan Lamas and the teachings of the Buddha. Whether through meditation retreats, mindfulness practices, or Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, people find that these teachings offer practical tools for navigating life's challenges and for finding purpose, even in a world full of uncertainty. As Tibetan Buddhism continues to evolve, its influence is expanding beyond spiritual centers into areas like psychology, environmentalism, and even leadership. The Dalai Lama's message of compassion and non-violence has inspired countless movements for social justice and peace around the world. Tibetan Buddhist teachings are not just practices, they are a way of life that offers a deep, lasting transformation of the mind and spirit. So, why has Tibetan Buddhism struck a chord with millions of people worldwide? It offers a path that transcends cultural boundaries and speaks to something universal within all of us, the desire for peace, compassion, and wisdom. Let's explore how Tibetan Buddhism is continuing to shape the modern world and how its timeless wisdom is more needed than ever before. The struggle for Tibet's future is far from over. Even today, the Tibetan people are engaged in a relentless fight, not only for their political autonomy, but also for the preservation of their rich cultural and spiritual heritage. After decades of hardship, exile, and oppression, Tibetans continue to hold on to their identity, determined to protect the very essence of their way of life. At the heart of this struggle stands the Dalai Lama, a figurehead who has become a symbol of hope, resilience, and compassion for the Tibetan people and for those who believe in peace and justice. The Dalai Lama remains outspoken in his opposition to Chinese repression, tirelessly advocating for the rights of Tibetans to preserve their religion, their culture, and their freedom. His message of non-violence, compassion, and the importance of human dignity has earned him the respect and admiration of millions worldwide. Yet, despite his efforts, Tibet remains under Chinese control, and the future of the region, both politically and spiritually, remains uncertain. Tibetan Buddhism, which has flourished in exile and gained recognition across the globe, continues to face tremendous challenges in its homeland. Monasteries that once stood as centers of spiritual practice, education, and culture have been destroyed or heavily restricted. The teachings of Tibetan Buddhism are often suppressed, and the people who continue to practice it face the risk of persecution. But despite this, Tibetan Buddhism endures. It has taken root in communities across the world, and its teachings continue to inspire individuals in ways that transcend borders and cultures. But what does the future hold for Tibet? Will Tibetans ever regain control of their land? And will the spiritual heart of Tibet, the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, be able to flourish once again in the land of its birth? These questions are still unanswered, and the path ahead is uncertain. However, what is clear is that the Tibetan spirit remains unbroken. The fight for Tibet's future is a fight for cultural survival, for the preservation of a way of life that has inspired generations, and for the continued legacy of Tibetan Buddhism. The answers may still be unfolding, but one thing is certain. Tibet's history is far from over, and its struggle for freedom, justice, and spiritual integrity will continue to resonate with the world for years to come. For me, the true allure of Tibetan Buddhism goes beyond its rich history or its profound philosophy. What draws me in is the practicality of its teachings and the real, tangible ways it can improve our lives. At its core, Tibetan Buddhism offers more than just spiritual rituals or ancient wisdom. It presents a framework for living with mindfulness, compassion, and peace. Tools that anyone, regardless of background or circumstances, can use to navigate the complexities of modern life. Meditation, for example, isn't just a practice. It's a way to develop a deeper understanding of our own minds, to become more present, and to cultivate a sense of inner stillness amidst the noise and chaos of the world. Mindfulness, which encourages us to pay attention to the present moment with an open heart and clear mind, offers a way to break free from the cycles of stress and anxiety that often dominate our daily lives. And then there's compassion, one of the most powerful teachings in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not just about being kind to others, but about learning to see the world through the eyes of others, understanding their suffering, and offering a hand of support. What fascinates me the most is how these teachings, despite centuries of political and cultural turmoil, have not only survived, but continue to thrive and inspire millions around the globe. Tibetan Buddhism has endured invasions, oppression, and exile, yet its core principles have remained unchanged, continuing to touch the hearts of people across different cultures and continents. The resilience of this spiritual tradition, its ability to adapt while maintaining its deep wisdom, is nothing short of extraordinary. Tibetan Buddhism isn't just a religion, it's a living, breathing system of wisdom that provides practical solutions for peace, happiness, and emotional balance. It teaches us how to face our challenges with courage, to approach others with kindness, and to live in a way that cultivates true joy, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. This is what makes Tibetan Buddhism so special. It's a timeless and universal guide for anyone seeking a deeper sense of meaning, connection, and peace in their life. And this is why, for me, its teachings will always resonate, no matter where we are in the world or what we're facing. As we come to the end of our exploration through the incredible story of Tibetan history, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the enduring legacy of Tibetan Buddhism. It's not just a spiritual tradition, it's a testament to resilience, survival, and transformation. Through centuries of invasion, exile, and oppression, Tibetan Buddhism has not only survived, but has evolved and adapted, offering wisdom and guidance to people all around the world. From its ancient roots in the high mountains of Tibet to its global presence today, Tibetan Buddhism continues to inspire millions, serving as a beacon of hope in a world that often seems divided and uncertain. At its core, Tibetan Buddhism offers lessons that are timeless and universal: the power of peace, the importance of compassion, and the transformative potential of enlightenment. These aren't just abstract concepts, they are practical tools for how to live a better, more mindful life. Whether it's through meditation, cultivating compassion for others, or simply pausing to reflect on the deeper aspects of our existence, Tibetan Buddhism shows us how to lead lives filled with greater meaning and purpose. In a world that constantly demands more from us, it offers a path back to stillness, balance, and clarity. So, the next time you sit down to meditate or take a moment to reflect on your day, remember the ancient wisdom that has shaped the very fabric of Tibetan culture and beyond. Think about how its teachings have withstood centuries of challenges and continue to guide people from all walks of life toward greater peace and understanding. Perhaps, in those quiet moments, you'll begin to see how the lessons of Tibetan Buddhism could offer a key to creating a more peaceful, mindful world for all of us. As we move forward, let us remember that the heart of Tibetan Buddhism is not just found in ancient texts or distant monasteries, but in the everyday actions of kindness, awareness, and compassion that we bring into the world. The journey isn't over, it's ongoing, unfolding with each new moment of reflection and mindfulness.